Dr. Phil McGraw had been listening to people's secrets for 30 years. 30 years of paternity disputes, family betrayals, hidden identities. He'd seen DNA results reunite families, destroy them, reveal truths that had been buried for decades. He thought he'd seen every possible outcome, every variation of shock, relief, devastation. But that day, when he opened the envelope and read the name, even Dr. Phil couldn't hide his disbelief. Because the name on the DNA report matched a name in a cemetery log from 1947. And the woman sitting across from him, the woman who'd submitted the DNA, had been born in 1978. 31 years after the person whose DNA she carried had supposedly died. The audience didn't understand yet. They were still waiting for the standard reveal, the expected drama. But Dr. Phil stood there, envelope in one hand, old leather-bound cemetery registry in the other, staring at two identical names written 76 years apart. And for the first time in 3 decades of television, he didn't know what to say. Margaret had walked onto the stage 10 minutes earlier. Nervous. Wringing her hands. She was 46 years old. Had lived her entire life believing she knew who she was. Daughter of Helen and Robert. Born in Sacramento. Raised in a normal house with normal parents doing normal things. But 2 years ago, her mother had died. And while cleaning out the attic, Margaret found a box. Inside the box, a birth certificate that wasn't hers. A hospital bracelet with a different last name. A photograph of a woman she'd never seen before, holding a baby. And tucked beneath everything else, a handwritten note on yellowed paper that said only, "Forgive me. I had no choice." Margaret had spent 2 years trying to understand. Hired a private investigator. Searched public records. Found nothing. Until she discovered her mother, the woman who raised her, had worked as a nurse at a Catholic hospital in 1978. The same hospital had a sealed adoption wing. The same hospital had burned down in 1982, destroying most records. Dead ends everywhere. Until Margaret took a DNA test. Submitted it to every database available. And 3 months ago, she got a match. Not a parent. Not a sibling. But a genetic match so close it could only mean one thing. She was directly descended from this person. The name that came back, Catherine Mary Sullivan. Margaret searched the name. Found a death certificate. Found a cemetery plot. Found a registry entry at Holy Cross Cemetery in Colma, California. Catherine Mary Sullivan. Died March 15, 1947. Age 19. Cause of death, childbirth complications, which was impossible. Because if Catherine died in 1947, she couldn't be Margaret's biological connection. Unless the DNA test was wrong. Unless the cemetery record was wrong. Unless something else, something impossible, was true. Dr. Phil had listened to Margaret's story during the pre-interview. His producers thought it was a clerical error. A mix-up in the database. A common name creating a false match. Standard television fare, reveal the mistake, help Margaret find the real connection, wrap it with a bow. But Dr. Phil had asked his team to verify everything. Pull the cemetery records. Contact the DNA testing company. Confirm the match. And that morning, 2 hours before taping, his lead producer had walked into his dressing room with a file that made no sense. The DNA match was confirmed. 99.7% certainty. Margaret shared significant genetic markers with Catherine Mary Sullivan. And the cemetery log, the original handwritten registry from 1947, had been scanned and sent over by the cemetery's historical archive. There, in faded ink, Catherine Mary Sullivan. March 15, 1947. Infant female, stillborn, buried with mother. No other family present. Arranged by St. Anne's Home for Unwed Mothers. Stillborn. Buried with mother. No other family. Dr. Phil had stared at those words for 15 minutes. Then he'd called the DNA testing company directly. Spoke to their head geneticist. asked if contamination was possible. If a mistake could create this kind of match. The geneticist had been certain, no. The sample was clean. The match was real. Margaret was genetically connected to Catherine Mary Sullivan, which meant Catherine's baby hadn't been stillborn. Which meant someone had lied in 1947. Which meant a baby had been taken from a dead teenage mother and given to someone else. And 76 years later, that baby's daughter was sitting in Dr. Phil's studio looking for answers. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. He held up the envelope. Margaret, these are your DNA results. The lab confirmed the match we discussed. You are genetically connected to Catherine Mary Sullivan. Margaret nodded. She'd known this part already. But she died in 1947. So she must be my grandmother, right? Or great-grandmother? She had the baby, gave it up for adoption, then died later? Dr. Phil looked down at the cemetery log. Then back at Margaret. That's what I thought too. But Margaret, I had my team pull the original cemetery records. And according to this, he held up the old leather book. Catherine's baby was stillborn. Buried with her. There was no adoption. No baby that survived. The audience stirred. Confused murmurs. Margaret's face went pale. That's impossible. The DNA doesn't lie. If I'm connected to her, then someone survived. You're right. Dr. Phil said quietly. Someone did survive. And I think I know what happened. But before I tell you, I need you to prepare yourself. Because what I'm about to reveal is going to change everything you thought you knew about your family. He gestured to his producer off stage. Bring out the file. A production assistant walked onto the stage carrying a manila folder. Dr. Phil took it. Opened it. Inside, photocopies of hospital records. A nun's handwritten journal. A letter from a priest. All dated 1947. After we got your DNA results. Dr. Phil said. I had an investigative team dig deeper into St. Anne's Home for Unwed Mothers. It was run by the Catholic Church. Closed in 1953. Most records were destroyed. But we found a former nun, Sister Mary Catherine, who's 94 years old now, living in a care facility in San Francisco. She worked at St. Anne's in 1947. And when we told her Catherine Mary Sullivan's name, she remembered. Margaret was gripping the armrests of her chair. Remembered what? Dr. Phil sat down. Not in his usual host position. In the chair next to Margaret. Eye level. Margaret, in 1947, unwed mothers were considered shameful. If a girl got pregnant outside marriage, families often sent them away. To places like St. Anne's. They'd have the baby in secret. The child would be adopted out. And the girl would go home and pretend it never happened. That was the system. I know, Margaret whispered. That's why I thought maybe Catherine gave up a baby before she died. She did, Dr. Phil said. But she didn't give the baby up. She died trying to keep her. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He stood. Walked to the edge of the stage. Looked directly into the camera. I need to stop for a moment and explain something to everyone watching. What we're about to discuss involves institutional practices from the 1940s that were legal then but would be considered deeply unethical today. If you have personal experience with forced adoption or Catholic homes for unwed mothers, this may be difficult to hear. Then he turned back to Margaret. Sat down again. Catherine Mary Sullivan was 19 years old. Pregnant. Sent to St. Anne's by her family. According to Sister Mary Catherine's journal, Catherine went into labor on March 14, 1947. Difficult birth. She hemorrhaged. The nuns called a doctor but he arrived too late. Catherine died around 2 a.m. on March 15th. Margaret was crying now. And the baby? The baby lived. Dr. Phil said. A healthy girl. Born at 1:47 a.m. But Catherine died before she could hold her. Before she could name her. And according to the practices of the time, babies born to unwed mothers who died in childbirth were considered orphans of sin. They were immediately put up for adoption, usually to Catholic families, usually with no record connecting them to their birth mother. Margaret's breath caught. So Catherine's baby was adopted. And I'm descended from that baby. Not quite, Dr. Phil said gently. Margaret, I need to ask you something. When you found that box in your mother's attic, the one with the birth certificate and the hospital bracelet, do you remember the name on the bracelet? Margaret nodded slowly. It said Baby Girl Sullivan. No first name. Just Baby Girl Sullivan. Dr. Phil opened the manila folder, pulled out a photocopy. A hospital bracelet. Yellowed plastic. Faded ink. Is this it? Margaret took it with shaking hands. Stared at it. Yes. This is the one I found. How did you? Because that bracelet was placed on a newborn at 1:47 a.m. on March 15, 1947, at St. Anne's home. And that newborn was given to a nurse named Helen Morrison, who had recently lost her own baby to SIDS and was desperate for a child. The nuns arranged a private adoption. No paperwork. No legal record. Just a baby handed to a grieving woman who promised to raise her as her own. The studio was completely silent. Even the camera operators had stopped moving. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Helen Morrison. That was my mother's maiden name. I know, Dr. Phil said. Margaret, you're not descended from Catherine Mary Sullivan. You are Catherine's daughter. The hospital bracelet, the birth certificate, the note that said forgive me, your mother kept them because she wanted you to know the truth someday. But she died before she could tell you. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Margaret started shaking. That's impossible. I'm 46. Catherine died in 1947. The math doesn't. She stopped. Realized. Oh my God. I'm not 46. I'm 76. Dr. Phil nodded. Your mother, Helen, she told you that you were born in 1978. But according to every record we found, you were born in 1947. Helen was 31 years old when the nuns gave you to her. She raised you as her biological daughter. Even falsified your birth year so no one would question why a woman in her 30s suddenly had a newborn. And because there were no computers, no centralized databases back then, she got away with it. Margaret was sobbing now. Full body-shaking sobs. I'm 76 years old. My whole life is a lie. No, Dr. Phil said firmly. Your life isn't a lie. Your mother loved you. She raised you. She protected you from a system that would have sent you into the foster care system with no identity, no family, no connection to your birth mother. What she did was illegal. But it wasn't malicious. It was love. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Dr. Phil reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. Margaret, when Catherine died, the nuns removed her personal belongings. Most were discarded. But Sister Mary Catherine kept one item. She didn't know why at the time. Just felt like she should. And when we contacted her last week and told her we'd found Catherine's daughter, she asked us to give you this. He placed the locket in Margaret's trembling hand. It was old. Corroded in places. But you could still see the delicate engraving on the front. See mess. Open it, Dr. Phil said quietly. Margaret's fingers fumbled with the tiny clasp. It took 3 tries. Finally it clicked open. Inside, a tiny, faded photograph. A teenage girl with dark hair and Margaret's exact eyes. And tucked behind the photo, a piece of paper so thin it was almost transparent. 4 words in careful handwriting. I love you, Mama. Margaret pressed the locket to her chest and wept. The audience stood. Not applauding. Just standing. Witnessing. Dr. Phil stayed beside her. Silent. Present. When Margaret could finally speak, she whispered. She knew. Catherine knew she was dying. And she still tried to tell me she loved me. Dr. Phil nodded. And now you know. You're not an accident. Not a mistake. You're Catherine Mary Sullivan's daughter. And she loved you enough to leave you a message that waited 76 years to reach you. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Margaret kept the locket. Visited Catherine's grave for the first time at 76 years old. Placed flowers. Said hello to the mother she never met but had been searching for her whole life. Dr. Phil kept a photo of the locket on his desk. A reminder that some truths take a lifetime to surface. But they're always worth finding. The cemetery log still lists Catherine's baby as stillborn. But Margaret knows the truth now. And so does the world. Catherine's daughter lived, loved, and finally came home.